Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and our guest today is Bill Elass. Bill, you bring a dimension to Wadsworth history that very few people can, and that is that you or your family have been in business probably since the day that you were born, right? Your father, who had the Ben Franklin store, the 5 and 10 cent store as we used to call it, or many times we would call it the dime store, started probably before you were born. Am I correct on that or not?
Well, no, it was just after I was born that in 1936 my dad moved to Richmond and started the store in Richmond. So just the first year.
In other words, the first Ben and Franklin store was in Richmond, Ohio,
Yes.
rather than... How did he happen to pick the name Ben Franklin?
Well, Ben Franklin is a franchise, and it was very popular in the 20s and 30s and growing very rapidly. And my dad had worked for Kresge for many, many years, and he wanted to have his own 5 and 10 cent store, and he was able to hook up with the franchise with Ben Franklin and start his own store.
Start his own store.
Yes.
Then when did he come to Wadsworth, Bill?
Well, he actually opened the second store in Wadsworth in 1937.
37.
Yes.
So that's when we had the first Ben Franklin store. And for the sake of history, tell us exactly where it was and how big it was when you first started it.
Well, it was 132 Main. It was right next to the old First National Bank building. And I think the store was like 25 feet wide and about 60 feet long.
Oh, it was huge, very, very long and very narrow.
Oh.
And what was on the other side of the store? Because that becomes part of this whole story a little later on.
Yes, the old Prince Keller and Coons hardware store.
Prince Keller and Coon hardware store, and then
Yes.
you finally expanded into that. But we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. But first, who is Bill Elass?
Well, I live here in Wadsworth, and I enjoy it. I've lived here, well, since 1944. We moved into Wadsworth in 1944 from Richmond. But I've been a member of Grace Lutheran Church practically all my life.
Your entire life.
And I like small-town America. I think it's a great place to live, to grow up and raise your kids in Wadsworth.
Where were you reared? Where were you born in Richmond?
Well, I was born in New York, in Buffalo, New York.
Oh, Buffalo,
and
I
soon
see.
afterwards, the family moved to Richmond.
To Richmond.
Yes.
Then you came to Wadsworth in 1944.
Yes.
Could you tell us your birthday for the sake of history?
Well, it's easy to remember because it's the same month and day that Shakespeare was born.
Aha!
And I'm not sure that my name came from Shakespeare because his name is Bill,
William.
too.
Yeah, Bill.
But April the 23rd, 1935.
1935. You were born 1935.
Yes.
Dad was, give us his background, please.
Well, Dad grew up in his father's store in Waynesburg, Ohio.
Waynesburg, which is near Canton.
Yes, it's just south of Canton. And Dad grew up in that store, and as a matter of fact, his father had a Ben Franklin store. At first it was just a general store, and then they had a Ben Franklin franchise.
Now let's get some names here. Grandfather's name was?
My grandfather's name, and I have to make sure that I have all my names correct here.
Yes, please do.
His name is John.
John Elass.
John Elass.
And he begot?
Ed Elass.
Who is your father, Ed Elass.
Yes.
And then Ed Elass begot Bill Elass,
Bill.
William Elass.
Yes.
And you are the only son of the marriage.
I'm an only child. But it's interesting that my great-grandfather, his name is George, had a jewelry store also in Waynesburg, Ohio. And his father had an old general store in Waynesburg, which was, his name was Christian Elass. It's called Chris Jr. And his father, Christian Elass, was the one who came over from Germany, and he came over from a little town which is now in France, but in the northern part of Alsace-Lorraine, a little town of Wimmenau. And he was born in 1790.
1790. I was going to say, I was counting backwards, and I'm up to 1800, but I didn't miss it by far,
That's
1790.
right. Yes, and then he came over with his 6 children in 1830 and came into the area. I think came into Zoar at first, and then ended up in Waynesburg.
And Zoar, of course, is a very heavily infiltrated Jurin community.
Yes.
And then Waynesburg was as well.
Yes.
Then they came, you went to Buffalo for what reason? Your dad, Ed Alsis, went
Well,
to
he was managing a Kresge store.
Kresge store and went to
Yes.
Buffalo.
Yes.
And you were born there.
Yes, I was born in Buffalo.
And then you went to Rittman, and then you came to Wadsworth.
Yes.
Before we get too far away from family relationships here, Marley, your wife,
Yes.
also has an extremely interesting background.
Yeah.
Tell us, first of all, what Marley's real name is.
Which one?
Oh, all of them.
Well, Marley has a German name, a hyphenated name. It's a beautiful name. It's Marie-Louise. Marie-Louise.
Marie-Louise, that's why we call her Marley.
And she was a kindling, and she also grew up in Wadsworth. She came over when she was 12 from Germany. From Germany.
And tell us why she came from Germany and what the reason that her parents had to come to, or not that they had to, but they came to the United States.
Yes. Well, her father, Paul, had been in the United States with the German aeronautical engineers in the early 30s, from like 1930 to 1935, and working with Dr. Eckner at the Goodyear Air. It was known as Goodyear Aerospace later on, but there it was the Goodyear Air and Wingfoot.
Right, and they're talking about lighter than aircraft now,
and
right?
lighter than aircraft. And he helped design the Akron and the Macon, and through that period of time.
In other words, Marley's father helped to design that.
Yes, that's correct.
And that was in the early 30s, was it not?
That's right.
And Marley was not yet born.
No, that's right. She was.
So then they moved here from Germany, the whole family, is that correct?
Well, at that time, there was just the 2 children, the 2 oldest.
And who are they and where are they now?
Well, I have to look at my notes again. So
That's perfectly okay, because we had a man in here the other day and he couldn't remember his wife's maiden name. We had to start the show over.
Well, Annegret is the oldest.
Annegret?
Yes, and she was born here in the United States, and she lives in Upper Michigan, and she married a man by the name of Gordon Gehring, who is from Akron, and Paul then, Paul Helmut, named after his father, has just retired. He was a surgeon, an open heart surgeon in Topeka, Kansas for many, many years. And then
Marley's older brother.
Yes.
Your wife's older brother.
Yes. And then next, of course, is Molly, and she was born in 1938 back in Germany just before the war. And then Ursula, who married Jim Allen here in town.
And which Allen was that?
Well, that was the one that had Allen, Hartzell, and Dibble, that had the insurance and the real estate.
Fred Allen's son?
Yes, Fred Allen's son. And then Joe, or Johann, who now lives in Erie with his family, and Barbara Barbot, who married Rick Ott.
Rick Ott, who's with the City of Wadsworth.
Yes, and they...
also had a carpet store.
That's right, and she's been teaching at Highland for quite a few years.
Just out of curiosity, what does Barbara teach?
She teaches German.
German. And she speaks German fluently.
Yes, she does.
As does your wife.
Yes, she does.
That's an interesting story. Let's go one generation beyond that. The three of you, the 2 of you now, you and Maria Louise. I love that name. It's a beautiful name.
That's a beautiful name.
A beautiful name. Have 3 children.
It's hard to call across the house Maria Louise, though.
That's right. So you always say what?
Well, I call her Molly, but not publicly. I should call her Marley, M-A-R-L-I.
That's what we call her, is Marley.
That's right.
Marley,
that's
right.
Don't you dare call her the other name.
No, I won't say that other name in public either.
All right,
Because first of all, I don't like that name so well as I like Marley. You have 3 children. Who are they, and where are they now?
Yes. Well, my oldest is Eric, and Eric is now in business with me, and as a matter of fact, they just had their 3rd son.
Wonderful. And Eric will be 34 years old.
Well, no, Eric is 32.
32 years old.
Eric is 32,
Okay.
of course, both Marley and I graduated from Wadsworth High School. Marley and I went to Lincoln School, and all three of my children went to Lincoln School.
And you graduated together, did you not? You and Marley graduated together?
No, I'm the old man in the.
Oh, really? How old is Marley then?
Well, Marley is 3 years younger than I am.
Okay, so she
was born
graduated
in 38, and I was born in 35.
35.
So,
What years did you graduate in high school?
Well, I graduated in 1953.
And Marley in 1956?
Yes, that's right.
Now, so far we have been interviewing all of the older people, and the last superintendent that we had was Frank Close. Who was your superintendent?
O.J. Work.
Oh, no, he was the principal, the superintendent.
Golly, who was the?
Morris Burkholder.
Was it Burkholder?
Yes.
That's right.
That's Morris Burkholder.
That's right.
Was the superintendent at that time. You were the first person we've had with Morris Burkholder as the superintendent.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we'll have more of those because we're in this segment of Wadsworth History on Film by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society. We are taking all the people from 65 to 80. Now, you're not quite 65, but you have such a long legacy of business, and we wanted to get someone who had an intimate knowledge of the old dime store, the old 5 and 10, the old Ben Franklin. So they're in business with you in the insurance business. We're going to be talking about that in a second. However, the thread between 1790 to 1997. Now that's almost 200 years,
yes.
Just about. As a matter of fact, it's more than 200 years,
yes.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
There has been a business connection with every member of your family.
Yes, and not only that, but each generation grew up working in their father's business.
That
yes.
is something extraordinary.
Yes.
Not all of the Elsases were in business, however. You have an Elsis who is a musician. Who was
yes.
that?
Well, I tell you, let me just tell you the rest of my family.
Okay, please do. Oh, that's right. You have two more to go.
Yes, that's the most important part.
That's right.
So, Lynn, of course, is a year younger than Eric, and she's a special ed teacher, and she teaches in Sebring, and she has 2 children.
Married too.
And she's married, and she lives in Canfield, Ohio. So we get to see those grandkids on a regular basis. And Carl is also in business with me, and he graduated from Bowling Green and then from Akron University with his MBA in finance. I think you're familiar with Akron University.
Quite well, and, having spent 30 years there myself.
And Eric graduated from Akron with a business management degree. Lynn went to Wittenberg, and then she got a degree from Malone, a master's in education.
Business. They probably
yes.
got that accelerated degree in
yes.
Malone.
And Carl married Michelle Horaceberger, and she's a teacher. She teaches French down at Tuslaw.
In Stark County.
Yes.
And the Horaceberger name in Wadsworth is significant for what reason?
Well, Phil Horaceberger has taught history forever in the high school. I think he's
35 years at least.
35 years, and so he knows a lot of people. A lot of people have had him in
That's right,
history.
and his wife has been the librarian here too.
That's right.
For many years as well.
Worked in the library for many years.
For many years.
So I just had to tell you the rest of.
I'm glad you did, because we one of the things that we have as a problem here is keeping within the hour, and I've tried to accelerate these things, but it's extremely important to get Mom and Dad and the children in here, because that thread of over 200 years of being in business. Now then, let's go to that other question about a member of your family who was not necessarily in business, but he was a musician. And what did he do?
That's right. Well, it's interesting. We've always tried to ask the question, why are so many people musicians in the Elsass family? And Frank Elsass was an excellent cornet player.
And he was what to you?
Well, he was my dad's brother, so he's my uncle.
Your uncle, Uncle Frank.
Uncle Frank. And grew up in Waynesburg, and played the cornet, and went on to schools in New York, and ended up playing with the Frank Manel Goldman Band, who played before the war and gave concerts in Central Park. And Frank was the soloist. for that band.
Franklin Goldman Band was synonymous with the John Sousa Band. That was one of the best bands in the world.
They played a lot of marches and typical band music. There are not very many bands that do that anymore.
No, they go. Unfortunately, they've gone to this, and this is a bias on my part, but they go to this somewhat of a swing band kind of a thing. And boy, I love the old band marches and the strong close order drill that they used to do in the Army and things of this nature. But continue with Uncle Frank.
He went into the service then during the Second World War, as did all four of my dad's brothers. My dad was too old to go into the service. My dad was the oldest of the family.
When was he born, incidentally?
Dad was born, to get that right here, Dad was born in 1903.
1903, so were he living, he would now be 94 years old.
That's right. He died in 1987.
Right.
So Frank then, after the war, went on to get his PhD and taught music at the University of Texas in Austin for many, many years, and ended up directing the concert bands and all the musicals, and gave cornet lessons, and really made quite a name for himself. And he was the one that started me in music.
And you're a cornetist.
And he brought me one of his cornets, and I still have it. I still have the one I started out with.
Is that right?
Yes.
And all of your kids played.
Yes.
Now, your two sons played trumpet, and your daughter played.
Well, she was the maverick. She started out and played the clarinet, and then, as you probably know, your brother's daughter was the same age, and they played the baritone.
They played the baritone together. That's
these
right.
two little girls in the marching band with a baritone that was bigger than they were.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank God the baritones were bigger than they were, otherwise they would be huge girls.
That's right.
Your daughter is a very precious petite young girl.
That's right.
And, now, music has played a big part in your life in addition to trumpet. I heard you say at the very, very beginning here that you have been a lifelong member of the Grace Lutheran Church here in Wadsworth.
Yes.
And as you became a little older, you became heavily involved with the music there at the church. Tell us how far you went in the music at Grace Lutheran Church.
Well, I'll tell you the most important thing that happened. My wife and I always say that we met in the choir loft on Christmas Eve.
That was nice.
And we both sang in the choir all through high school. And I had come back from Wittenberg, and I would always go up and sing in the choir. And down there in the altos was this girl that I knew, but had sort of changed since I had
grown up.
seen her before. And so that's, we always say we met in the choir loft. So that's probably the most important thing that music has done for me at the church.
You met your wife that way, right?
But Helen, Mrs. Nicodemus, was the choir director for 29 years.
Okay, now Mrs. Nicodemus, which Nicodemus was this? This is Helen Nicodemus, but she was married too.
Well, and I'm sorry, right now I can't come up with her first name, but she was not married. And,
Helen Nicodemus?
No, that was, she was not Helen. I'm sorry, I can't say her first name, but she came from the Nicodemus family in Wadsworth.
Evelyn?
Evelyn, yes, Evelyn, you're right, Evelyn. Good. You're better than my wife in remembering names. Evelyn, I sang under Evelyn for many years, and she decided to retire. She was the county supervisor of music.
That's right.
Medina County, and she retired and went to, I think, Arizona with her sister.
Evelyn Nicodemus graduated in 1939 from Wadsworth High School.
Okay. And
she's now 76 years old.
And I was very intrepid about doing this job. And she said, Bill, she said, you can do it. You know, you've got the background, you can do it. So I started directing, and I directed the choir for 12 years at Grace Church. And just something I really loved.
And you're still singing there, you know?
I still sing and then enjoy the choir, yes. Yes, of course, I played the trumpet and sang in choirs all through high school, sang for Kingsley Sears. And,
Kingsley Sears. Let's talk about Kingsley Sears just a little bit, because his name has come up a couple times, but no one has ever really been in his choirs. Now, I was and you were.
Yes.
Who was he? Where did he live? And tell us a little bit more about him if you can remember.
Well, this was one of those situations where it was a team. Kingsley Sears and his wife.
Ruby.
They worked together, and each year he would have a musical, and they would have a Christmas musical production. They do operettas, and it was always a team that was working with those. Ruby always worked with him, and they lived on High Street. That brick home up there, partway up to 261 there on the left.
Ruby Sears was Ruby Wilkerson Sears, and
right?
she went to Baldwin Wallace College, as did Kingsley Sears.
Mm-hmm.
And they met there.
Well, Kingsley, I think, taught me more about life and about music than any other teacher in high school. Well, there's some others I guess I could mention, but I really enjoyed singing with him, and sang in the choir for 4 years, and then we put together a quartet. We had a male quartet that sang. The harmonettes, always got so much good press that we decided that we'd have our men's quartet.
And what did you call the men's quartet?
We called it the men's quartet.
The men's quartet. The harmonettes were a group of 8 girls.
That's right.
Who sang in not necessarily close harmony, but in melodic harmony.
Yes.
I guess that's redundant. Harmony, it certainly is melodic. But it was nothing outrageous. It was always very, very soft and subdued kind of a thing.
Yes, it was sort of like the women's groups at that time.
That's right.
It was a soft, beautiful. It was
it's beautiful.
Beautiful music,
many of those girls are still in Wadsworth.
Yes.
And one of these days, if we have more time, we're going to be getting some of those school groups together again. The High Y, remember the High Y?
Yes.
No longer in existence, and the harmonettes and the Girls' Glee Club and all of those other kinds of things. Going from the music part to another aspect of your life, and we're going to come back to that in a couple minutes because that's a very important part of your life, but going from that to your business again. Describe, if you will, and tell us some of the people who worked in the 5 and 10 cent store in Wadsworth, and this would have been back in the very late 30s, the early 40s, and unfortunately we have some pictures here. We have a picture of the people.
Yes.
And this was taken about when? When was this taken, Bill?
Well, I would say that was in the early 60s.
Early 60s.
That picture was taken. But some of those people had been there for many, many years. Eileen Slaybaugh.
Could you identify Eileen Slaybaugh?
Yes, I have to pull it up here so I can see it. By golly, I don't think Eileen was on this picture yet. I'm sorry.
I was looking for her and I didn't see her.
Yeah, this was before Eileen. She worked for many years as the Candy Girl, and then Leon Rutledge.
Yes,
is
Leon's
here.
there.
Yes, Leon's
right there.
Is there.
This is Leon Rutledge right there.
Rutledge, and then Willard Stout.
Willard Stout is right there.
And and Glenn Leatherman.
Glenn Leatherman's right there, and Glenn Leatherman had worked in the hardware store next door.
Yes.
And then when you expanded into the hardware store, Glenn came with you.
Yes, he came with
Just a great guy, wasn't he?
Oh, he certainly was. Yeah, he was a handyman. He could do anything.
Anything at all.
And Anna Days was with us.
Anna Days was over here.
Years, yes.
She was there for years and years and years. And Marilyn there, and her daughter worked there as well.
Yes, that's right.
Marilyn Days, I'll come up with her married name in a second. I know it as well as my own. But we all have the same problem, age.
And Helen Jones, probably...
that's Helen right there.
Yeah, she probably worked at the store. Well, no.
Where's Helen?
Helen is right here. Helen is right here. Helen worked at the store for probably 35 years.
Did she?
Yes. And then Anna Keller.
Is Anna on there?
Let's see. This is Anna right here. Anna Keller. She was worked at the store for many years.
There's Anna. I know her, yes.
She's a wonderful person.
Yes.
Lived on Oak Street for many years. Her husband was a very, very handy person with woodworking and so on. And then Madeline Hallowell and Alice Young, and Helen Edis, Alice McCoy, and Estelle Witchy. One person that still works at the store, it's now Ritzman's, it's not on that picture, but Lavina Gaiman.
Lavina, yes.
Has been there for many, many years.
Lavina actually worked in the office for many years, and then she went on the floor.
That's right.
Lavina came to Wadsworth from Allentown, Pennsylvania in 1944 to move west of Wadsworth. She had two sisters, Elizabeth and Bertha. And her father was not Joel Gaiman, who was the brother of Abram Gaiman. Her father was Abram Gaiman. Mm-hmm. That's a story all into itself, because tell us about Lavina.
Well, Lavina was probably the most caring person that I've ever had the pleasure to know. She cared very much about everyone, and it was just wonderful to have her in the store because she knew a lot of people, and if Lavina was helping someone, that they would be taken care of.
And she still does that. She still has that ebullience when she talks with someone, and she takes. The significance here was that she was as of the Mennonite faith, and typically those girls don't work in stores like this, not always at least, but Lavina has been, she was there when your father was there.
That's right. And
I'll bet she has worked there at least 35 or 40 years, hasn't she?
That's right.
She is now 68 years old.
Yes. But we've had many, many people, of course, working in the stores through the years. Dad started back in 1936, and we sold the business finally in 81, so that was 45 years. 45 years. And when we had built the new store on High Street, we had up to 45 people working in the store.
Well, you had enlarged the store significantly to carry things more than just the five and dime kinds of things.
That's right.
When one walked into the old, let's have a picture. We have a picture of the old Ben Franklin.
Yes.
Right there. This one happened to be the Rittman store, but the one in Wadsworth was built just exactly the same way.
Yes, very similar.
Same way. And tell us, when you walked in, for the very first thing that you walked into was the candy and peanut counter, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know why Dad always felt. There's an early picture that shows what it looked like, along with with my dad and some of the people that worked in that store. The only people I really know in that picture is my father and of course his brother Bob. The types of things that they had were, what describe some of the things that they had in the store? Well, As you say, the candy was always the thing that you would see when you would come in.
And smell. Oh my, did it smell good. Those roasting peanuts and the popcorn.
I think the best way to describe it is when a parent would bring their little child into the store. The first thing that they had to do was to go directly to the fish tanks where they had.
Oh, that was another.
There was goldfish,
yes. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes Dad would have canaries, and they would have to go and see the goldfish and see the pets, and then from there they would pull their mother or father to the toy department, and with all these toys that were 5 and 10 cents, and pick out a toy, and then of course the parent would have to look for what he was looking for, and that might be hairpins or Kleenex or pots and pans or towels or just everyday items, that you need.
And everybody in Wadsworth went to the 5 and dime.
And then on the way out, then of course the child would have to go by the candy department and get some little candy to take home.
And it was very inexpensive.
Well, there was a whole section of penny candy.
That's right.
And it was wrapped penny candy, and you would either get some penny candy, or you might get some popcorn, or we would cook our own popcorn.
A nickel a box, wasn't it?
Or we had nuts. We had freshly cooked nuts.
Oh, and did they smell good?
So whenever anyone would leave, no matter what they came for, they would stop at the candy department and go home with something, a bag of some goodie from the candy department.
I need to tell you a story about what happened in 1942 at Ben Franklin's store. My brother Chris, who is my oldest brother, now dead, has been dead for 10 years now, was a very highly accomplished violinist. As a matter of fact, it would have been his career had it not been for the fact that he was severely wounded in the war and he could no longer play. Well, he could play, but he had to hold a violin way back here to play, and of course you can't do that in an orchestra, and he changed from that to wind instruments, and he did very well, and he was a music director. But at that time, he still had not been wounded. He was in the service, and he came home for Christmas, or just before Christmas, and I think that he might have been home maybe a few days before Christmas. And he and my mother went into the dime store at the 5 and 10, and they had a little toy violin. It was made out of metal, and it was about this long. And one of the ladies there said, "Oh, I play this violin for my little son." He took the violin, and of course it was only this big, and he tuned it by ear, and he played Ave Maria. Before he was finished, the entire store came around, made a circle around him, and listened to it. And this was I mean, you can't make too much music out of that, but he was able to make music out of that. So they had toys there, too.
That's a wonderful story.
It is a story, a nice story. I remember that as if it were yesterday. But they had some toys there, too. And tell us about the kinds of toys that they had. We used to call toys that were very cheap, and they were just kind of painted over as having been Japanned. What do you know about that?
Well, actually, during the war, and I really remember this during the Second World War, because Dad had a lot of problems finding people to help.
You bet.
His brother went to war, so he had to run back and forth between the two stores, and I would go, and even when I was small, I would go and help unpack the freight that came in, and of course I especially enjoyed unpacking the toys.
Of course.
And checking those out. And at that time, there really were not very many Japanese toys. Most of those toys were little die-cast toys, or there was a lot of toys made of cardboard.
A lot of many were made out of cardboard.
And one of the things that they would do during the war was they would have these, they would come in flat boxes, and they would be these punch-out cardboard toys, and then you would assemble them, and there would be all sorts of things. It would be there might be warplanes or tanks, or there might be girls' toys, you know, with a bedroom and a bed for the doll and so on. But those were very popular during the war. I've often thought, you know, today I see toys that are commanding a very high price, you know, as an antique. And I remember seeing those toys in my dad's store. And
they were probably being sold for maybe 10, 15, 20 cents, 25 cents, 29 cents.
Very inexpensive.
You moved from Main Street all the way up to High Street.
Yes.
Now that's actually one full block, although it was in the second block, right?
Yes, that's right.
And tell us about the problems that occurred to secure the land for the building, and that is the legal problems, and what was there and what did you have to do to put that store where it is?
Well, that was during the period of time when the word urban renewal was very popular, that you would go in and put in new buildings in a downtown area. And I guess first of all you have to remember what actually used to be in that area.
What was there?
Well, there was the old hotel.
The Kreider Hotel, or the Park Hotel.
Yes, there was the hotel there, and then there was also the veterinary doctor.
Right behind.
That was there. And then around on the other side where the Knapp's and the restaurant is, that's where the, Merriman's was in part of that. I think that's just an empty lot right now. It's a parking lot. But then there was the Springer Furniture Store.
Big 3-story building.
Yes. And then, of course, the church, which is still there on the corner, the old, beautiful old white church there. And then there were, I don't know if people remember, but there were alleys that went back
Surely.
through there with quite a few very small homes off of those alleys.
Bender Court was back in there.
Yes, yes. And so that was one of the jobs, and the city, of course, was instrumental. They were the ones that did a lot of that through this urban renewal type of thing, and purchasing the property and then turning around and selling it so it could be developed, and developing parking. And of course, parking was that terrible word back then, that's why people were going to shopping centers, because they had parking meters in small town America, and you had to feed the parking meter, and people didn't want to do that. They didn't want to put money in the parking meter. They wanted to park free. So there was a large parking lot that was put in. And
behind the store.
Behind the store.
And that was the era in which you had doors from the back of the store rather than coming in the front of the store.
Well, we had, at the new store, of course, was the doors across the front, and then there was a back entrance that came in from the parking lot. So the store had two entryways, and they had checkout counters, both the front and the back.
And that doubled the numbers of people that you had to check people out too, did it not?
Yes, yes. That was meant that we had to have a lot of people. We went from a store that was 6,000 square feet to a store that was 25,000 square feet.
4 times larger plus.
Yes. And that store ended up being one of the largest Ben Franklin stores in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, yes. Most of the stores were 6,000 to 8,000 square feet. So this was one of the largest in the United States.
And that happened in 1981.
Well, in 1971.
Or 71.
In 1971, we made the move into the new store.
You were at that time about 35 years old, is that correct?
Yes.
35 years old, 34, 35 years old. Who was in charge?
Well, you remember my father, don't you?
Very well, surely.
Yes, yes. My father, Ed. See, he was in his 60s. He was in his late 60s at that time. See, there's 30 years difference. There's 30-year jumps in the generations between my dad and I, and between Eric and I, my oldest son, and myself, and between Eric and his second son. So there's 90 years difference in the 3 generations.
We had the same thing in my family.
Yes.
32 years, actually.
Dad was very active, and I think that he let me do the hiring and ordering the merchandise and that part of it. But Dad was a wonderful bookkeeper. He kept the records, and he had a wonderful bookkeeping method, and I still have those old records, and everything is longhand, all the ledgers, and everything is just so. And I remember once the IRS came in, and there was something that they wanted to check on, and they asked to see his books, and he laid out the books, and they sort of leafed through the books, and they closed them, and they said, well, that's the best set of records that we've ever seen.
Isn't that
You're
something?
okay, and they
You're
went
okay.
on. But Dad would come in probably at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and he would sort of check everything out, make sure everything was all right, and then about 10 in the morning, 10:30 or so, he would leave and go home and help Mom, and then come back in the afternoon. And so by the time I came in the morning, which was, like 8 o'clock in the morning, he would have a little list of things that he felt needed attention, and it really worked out very well.
Your mother did not work in the store significantly, but she was there sometimes, was she not?
Well, back when they started the store, back in the 1936, my mom was very, very active in the store for many years.
But then she pulled out.
Yes.
A little later on.
Yes.
I would see her in there from time to time, but in the later years, I didn't see her at all.
No. Well, my mom was in poor health
Yes.
the last 20, 25 years.
Long time.
And so she was not able to be as active. But actually, the way it was set up was it was a partnership of my mother and my father and Marley and myself.
The four of you.
So we were partners in the store.
Then they passed on, but they didn't pass on before you sold the store.
That's right. We sold the store in 1981 to the Ritzmans. That's correct.
And then you did something that, see, how old were you at that time? 1981, you would have been 40 years old or so.
Well, I was like 47.
47 or 48 years old.
Yes.
You started anew.
Yes, we sure did.
And tell us what you did that's so particularly significant, because this is another history of Wadsworth all by itself. You started anew.
Well, more recent history anyway. Well, that probably was the best-selling job that I ever did in my life, was to find someone to purchase the store and to keep it viable as a store, and all the people that worked there were able to continue working there as long as they wanted to, and I was pretty satisfied about all that. And then, of course, the day came that the store changed hands, and of course the locks were changed, and I didn't have a key to the lock anymore. And I came home and I sat down, and I was sort of satisfied and sort of sad, and then my wife asked me what I was going to do now, and I said, frankly, I hadn't even thought about that. So that's sort of where I started out. I started out not really knowing what I was going to do. I was a little young to retire. I know that you've sort of retired a few times in your life, and then you've started in again. I
retired at 58, and I have had 4 jobs since.
Yes.
I can't hold a job down, you see. 4 jobs since, but I thoroughly enjoyed every single one of them, and I still am not retiring, and I want to continue as long as I possibly can, as long as God gives me the strength. Yes. And that's what you're going to do, I'm sure.
Well, that's what I wanted to do, and there were a few things that I had really wanted to do. One was I really loved my music, and I wanted to sort of concentrate on that, so I spent extra time for a year at church working with the music and trying to enlarge the program there. And I'd always wanted to teach in college, and so I got an opportunity. I have a MBA that's probably so old it's covered with an inch of dust, but I guess they still recognize that even though they're 150 years old. So I taught at Akron University, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I
remember that you taught in the Community and Technical College.
Well, yes, I taught business courses and intro to business and retailing and office management and all those business courses, which I very much enjoyed.
As a matter of fact, you taught in the evening college, did you not?
That's right. That's right.
And as I remember, we were associated during that period of time, because at that time I was the dean of the evening college.
That's right.
As I remember, you taught for 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Caesar, you helped me in a good many ways during that period of time.
Oh.
Not only was there an association there that you were the dean of that school and I was teaching, but there was a number of instances when I was trying to get my 3 kids involved in college and trying to work to make things work and to get them where they should be at the right time in college, and you were a great deal of help to my family.
Well, that's what I was supposed to do, and I'm glad it worked out that way, but they weren't very hard to help because they were self-motivated, well taken care of, and certainly had a good role model in you and Marley.
And as it ended up, of course, one has an MBA from Akron, and one has his bachelor's degree from Akron. So you were very instrumental in that. But that was sort of a rough time for our family that we went through. One of the things that I did, I went down to the store that my dad grew up in, that his brother had, that Bob had, and I don't know if anybody remembers Bob Elsis, but Bob was with my father. It was Elsis, it was Bob, and Dad, Ed, and Mookley. It was Elsass Brothers and Mookley, and Mookley was the one that ran the store in Wadsworth, and Bob went back and forth for those early years. So here I went back and I helped Bob because he was getting ready for retirement, and I helped him through the fall and through a Christmas season and through Easter, through the very busy seasons, you know, in the store business. And there I was back in the old store where my grandfather you know, was for many years, and I would go back in the evenings and work on Christmas displays and so on, and I swear that there would be a voice back there saying, "Stupid, don't do it that way, do it this way," you know. But it was quite interesting, and then I just had an opportunity that I guess we didn't really realize at the time. One of the insurance people that we had worked with is the old insurance, the old Lutheran Mutual Company, and Ollie Kerfman was the agent in Wadsworth for many, many years.
That's right.
And Ollie and Marie were good friends of my parents, and when he retired, there were a number of other people that took care of the business in the area, and then I had the opportunity at that point to do that. And I don't think Molly was very excited, you know, at first blush that this is what she really wanted to do. But we sort of persisted and started out, and as a matter of fact, I started September the 15th, 1982, so we're almost at 15 years here.
And the Lutheran Mutual.
And yes.
You started up above the corner store, which used to be Brenneman's Drug Store.
Yes.
And now is, what is it, Cafissimo?
Yes, Cafissimo, I think is how he pronounces it.
And
yes.
it's upstairs from that. And when you first started up there, you were just you and Marley, is that correct?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Marley was still working at the store. She was helping with the old Ben Franklin part of the of that operation, and at the end of that year, I talked her into getting her insurance license, and so she did, and she joined me. Yes.
It didn't take long before your name started appearing in the paper and winning some awards from the Lutheran Mutual. How did that happen, Bill?
Well, I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
You mean it just you went home, you sat in the chair, and the awards kept coming? Is that right?
Well, people tell me now, well, aren't you sad that you didn't start in with this business when you got out of college? You know, and I said, well, maybe so, but I really enjoyed, you know, being in the store business all through the years, and I enjoy people so much. And but yes, God's been very kind to us.
But you still haven't answered the question. How did you win those awards?
Well, you know, there comes a time when you have to go back to school.
Right.
And I had been out for 22, 23 years at that point, and I went back to school. I really started to take courses, and I took all the school that I could get. At one point, when we were going through this change, I was teaching 6 hours at Akron U. I was still on the Wadsworth School Board. I was directing the church choir, and I was taking courses myself. The first thing I did when I got into the business, I signed up for two courses.
Continuing education courses.
So I probably have taken the equivalent of 60 hours of college work
credit
since in these past 15 years.
That's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. It was but what you wanted to do, right?
But I felt that I needed to know as much as I could about it, and of course, we know a lot of people in Wadsworth, and I think people realize that we tell the story straight. And
oh yes, if there's anything that you're noted for is for telling the story straight. We have just a few minutes left, and I want to get 4 or 5 things on the tape before we finish. Quickly tell us about how your 2 boys became involved with you and what the company looks like now compared to 15 years ago.
Well, that's really a great joy to me to have both of my boys in business with me. It sort of takes me back to the days when
That's right.
when I was helping my father. And Eric was maybe a little more reluctant. He did not know what he wanted to do. And one of the things I suggested, why don't you go to an agency in Fort Wayne, Indiana, that a friend of mine has, and work with him and see if you like this business or not. And he went there for a couple of years, and he called me up one day and said, Dad, I really like this, but I want to work with you. So he came back to Wadsworth.
That was an answer to a prayer.
Yes. And then Carl, he was deciding what college courses he wanted to take at Bowling Green, and it was after his first year, after his freshman year in college, and he was looking at all these courses, and I said, well, Carl, what are you interested in? And he said, well, he said, either teaching or business. And Carl was in the teacher's aid program when he was a senior and really enjoyed it.
Carl is K-A-R-L.
K-A-R-L.
So you have that for posterity.
That's right, K-A-R-L. And so I said, well, that's interesting. What kind of business? And he said, insurance.
There you go.
And investments. And I said, wow. I said, I didn't realize that, you were interested. Oh, yeah. He said, I'd really like to work with you. Well, I said, well, you make up your mind. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And he said, yes, he wanted to do that. And I said, well, if that's the case, you can work for me summers. You come back summers from college and you work for me. So Carl has been working for me summers while he was going to college. And then he came back and signed up for the course at Akron U, which is a wonderful MBA program.
Very good.
And he did that in a year. He started out, he graduated from Bowling Green. The next week he signed up for
MBA
the
program
courses and started in.
Finished it in a year?
And finished it in a year.
Very demanding course.
Yes.
He has to be extraordinarily bright to be able to finish that one in a year.
So he then has been with me all that time.
Now you're set for the next 2 generations because your kids then will have their kids working there. We need to get to another aspect of your life. You have such a very rich life here that we may not be able to finish it all, but we're going to give it a try. School board. 16 years on the school board, is that correct?
Yes.
And
Would you like to see my bruises and my bumps?
All you have to do is to get into any kind of a public entity and you'll have all kinds of bruises, and you know that, and that's the way it is. I'll never understand why people get into politics or school boards or things like that, because there's no pay, or next to no pay, and it takes all kinds of time and the abuse you take, but it's wonderful that they have people who do that, and it was wonderful that you were in that position for so many years. What kinds of things happened during the years that you were in the school board?
Well, that was the period of time when girls' sports became so important.
Title IX.
And of course, Wadsworth, I'm very proud of the way Wadsworth has responded to the girls' sports, and of course the
good thing
the
they
teams
did,
the last few years have just been wonderful.
And we won the championship
I can't take a lot of credit for that, but at least it started back in those early years.
Now, Bill, you're probably trying to say that you and I didn't teach those girls how to bounce those basketballs. Is that what you're saying?
Not like they did
No.
in that in those championship games, I should say. Not.
Oh, they were tremendous.
Yes. And of course the new gym that was built here, and quite a bit of construction through the years at the schools.
And what about the academics? The sports was really a nice job there, but you were involved with academics and perhaps in helping to bring some different courses to the schools.
Well, some of the concerns, of course, when we first got on was the fact that there was not much at all in computers, and to try to develop that program. And I think this year now it's in the 2nd grade.
It should be if it's not.
I think because my My oldest grandson is in the 2nd grade up at Overlook, and I think this was the first year he's had computers. So, and then next year it'll be in first grade. Yes.
After I left the university, I went to Holy Family in Stowe to become the principal. We had computers in kindergarten by that time, but it was a private school, and we could push a little harder, I suspect. But it's been a wonderful program to go down to the 1st grade, and I'm sure the kindergartners will have it soon.
Yes.
Most of the little kids in kindergarten know more about computers than you and I do.
Yes.
My grandson can work, he's only 4.5 years old, he can work the computer. Can't tie his shoes, but he can work the computer really well. So that's a good time to learn.
I guess the other thing that came in was the standardized testing, and that's created, I'm still not certain I agree with that, but it's created a curriculum that's geared to passing the standardized
proficiency testing. How about the things such as the accelerated, not the accelerated, but the AP courses, the advanced placement courses, and the grading system that was changed while you were, I think you were president of the board when they changed the grading system so that you had weighted grades, is that right?
Yes. You know, when you run a race, somebody wins. Somebody cuts the tape first. And it just didn't seem right that these seniors were graduating, that there were 20 kids that would have a 4-point. I mean, wonderful, but who won?
That's right.
And this was a way of determining who was number 1 in the class, and I think that should be recognized.
Could you tell us some bruises you got out of that one?
Well, you know, we were called elitists. That
yes.
we wanted to have to determine who was the best and so on, and of course weighting the courses sort of meant that some students felt, well, they couldn't take those courses; those were too tough for them to take, and there was maybe a little animosity that came out of it. But I think generally it's a good thing. I think it's helped the education excellence, the academic excellence in the school.
And Wadsworth has a phenomenal reputation for education.
And that you recognize that they're doing a good job. We were at the assembly, the recognition assembly this year. My son Eric was Rotary president, and I was Rotary president about 30 years ago, and so we worked together since I helped raise money for the scholarships, and the Rotary gave out 6 scholarships. And it's just amazing the academic scholarships that were given out, and the wonderful achievements of the students in academics. So even though I'm not on the board anymore, I can still be proud of
well, you
Wadsworth.
served 16 very, very good years on that board, and I think probably one of the things that is good for any system is to have that continuity, and then after enough time, then we bring some other people to have the continuity, and it just kind of continues the way that you did with your father and you were going to do with your sons too. Bill, there's another question that I need to ask you because we have only about a minute left here in the program. And it has a great deal to do with what you have done for the city of Wadsworth. Now, you mentioned the Rotary Club, but it's more than just a Rotary Club. You don't go to a luncheon once every Tuesday at the Methodist Church at 12 o'clock noon.
Yes.
What kinds of things have you been personally involved with vis-a-vis the Rotary Club and what it has done for crippled children, what it has done for the community? Do you remember getting the stop lights, rather the caution lights for the schools, and the spaghetti dinners and the whatever? What do you remember about all of that?
Well, I guess the one thing I remember was working with the United Fund and the trials and tribulations we've had with that through the years, and I do think it was a good thing that we tied up with the Akron United Fund. I was president of that for 2 years, and I've always felt that it's important that those charities be supported. Also, I think it's important that we recognize the young people, and I've been chairman of this, we call it the Pizza Bash. They have it before the last home basketball game. And we raise between $3,000 and $4,000 a year, and turn around and give that money out as scholarships to the seniors that are starting out their college career.
Bill, we are at the end of the hour, and I want to say something. You know, we pretty well went to school at the same time. I'm a few years older than you. I was born in 31, you were born in 36. And we don't say these things to each other when we're growing up because, well, it's just not the thing to say. But you have been an inspiration to so many people in Wadsworth because of your very quiet, non-invasive demeanor, but with such a strength of wisdom, a strength of courage, and a strength of giving to other people. And for that reason, Bill, we are genuinely proud to have you as part of Wadsworth History on Film.
Well,
thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much. It's really an honor having you present this and talk to me. I've admired you for many, many years. And,
well, thank you. And that admiration then will last, and we're pleased with that.